Sionagad, Uwodu, Ujilas, Dawadon. Tasko ta, Yawade Tied, Talagwaji now, Elijah Awatessa. Diga Giga Yelige, Uwe Ala Brandy Ross, Dudon. Diga Gilis, Sequel Ala Gulf, Dudon, Ale Guy Ala Sabetha, Trowbridge, Dudon, Sabu Ugidon, Sequel Dudon, Asen, Awadan Nilige, Tla Dawada Tina, Asen Sabu Awada Lok, Yon Dudon. Haskell Indian Nations, Uton Jin Delacroix, Disquata. Nowu, Northeastern State University, Digod Delacroix. Hello everyone, my name is Kynze Ross. I'm 22 years old. I live in Talakog, but I originate from Leech. My parents are Stan and Brandy Ross. My grandparents are the late Reverend Lewis and Ruth Ross and Guy and Sabetha Trowbridge. I have one sibling, his name's Jackson, but I'm the eldest. I don't have any children, but I have one nephew named Yon. I graduated from Haskell Indian Nations University, and I am pursuing my degree at Northeastern State University.
All right. Well, obviously, you're doing really well with the Cherokee language, and I talked to you a little bit about that earlier. So would you tell people how you've started on and progressed in your Cherokee language work?
So I started learning the language when I was around 5 or 6. My grandpa Lewis wanted his grandchildren to learn. He would take us to Cherokee churches with the Cherokee Baptist Association, and the first word that he taught me was Agiosi. I'm hungry. He told us, if you just say that to an old Indian woman, you'll learn and they'll feed you. You'll never go home with an empty stomach. When he passed away on New Year's Day in 2011, I took a break and felt that I wasn't ready to learn just yet because I lost my main source of education. My father joined the Cherokee Language Master Apprenticeship Program back in 2016, and he graduated in 2018. He was the 4th cohort. Whenever he came home, I could tell he was on a mental block, so switching from Cherokee all day to English, it was really hard. So I was kind of his translator, so the words I remember from the churches and Grandpa helped a lot. Just simple words like fork or watch or time. We communicate that way. Right now, I work for the Cherokee Language Master Apprenticeship Program as an office assistant, and I would converse with the teachers and the students, see what they want, who they're looking for, help do evaluations, see where their language is at. I am in novice mid, but I would think I'm a little bit lower, maybe a little bit higher, but that's just me. Conversing, and I'm okay, but understanding, it's a lot better. I converse with my dad quite a bit, but he's worked around so many English-speaking people. He dropped down to novice low, so we're both building it back up together.
All right. This project that we're talking about today is the Canon and Pounder that you worked on with Victor Wildcat. So would you tell us how you met Victor and how you started working with him?
I met Victor for the first time on the first night of the Canon class. Interesting and wiseful man. I learned quite a bit. I learned new Cherokee words. I don't remember them because it was really cold that night, and I was just worried about getting by the fire. What I learned was different cultural behaviors, different habits, what men and women did, why we used the canons, why we had Kanechi, and what their purpose is. When I was 17 up until now, I knew how to make Kanechi from foraging all the way to making a ball. From as little as I can remember, which is about 8, my mom was the only one that knew how to make Kanechi, like actually cook it. And once she found out I could actually make Kanechi, form it in a ball, she taught me how to make it. So.
Well, okay, so I'm going to stop you right there.
Okay.
Take us through that process of A, what it is, and B, how you do it.
So Kanechi is the best way to describe it is a protein soup. You gather hickory nuts and the meat goodie, which is the nut inside the hickory nut. You scoop it out and pound it into like a paste, and you boil it in water, and you put it over hominy or rice, your preference, and then you get a soup. You get your protein soup. If you want it sweet, like me and my family, we put some sugar in it. But I usually gather mine in the fall time. I wait every other fall because last fall, that's when the hickory nuts were decent. I could make about 3 or 4 balls out of a 5-gallon bucket. And this coming fall, I have to wait until next fall when they're more on the ground. Can't tell you where I find them. But you forage them, you pick them off the ground, you split them up, you find which ones have little holes inside the hickory nut. If there's a hole in it, that means a maggot beat you to it. Or if there's any on the ground at all, squirrels haven't got to it. Once you pick out the maggot hickory nuts, you look and see which ones look rotten on the outside. And if they look decent, that's when you crack into it to see if there's still meat goody. The tedious part that I've been taught, and other people have taught other people, is sitting there and getting a toothpick or just something really thin and scraping out the meat goody and then having to pound it out later. My fingers hurt whenever from doing all that. And before I had my canola pounder, I would get an old kitchen pot my mom didn't mind me tearing up, put it on the ground, and I used my dad's hog riding stick because it was hickory and it was heavy. And I would just pound it until it smelled like peanut butter and it formed a paste where I could just form it inside of a ball. Once I'm done, I put it in tin foil and throw it in the freezer, sell it or give it to family. And that's when my mom or me takes care of cooking it.
Okay, so let me ask you this. You mentioned 2 different ways of pounding them. Do you always keep the meat in the nut?
Some people do, yes, but I find it bitter whenever you leave the meat inside the nut. I make sure there's no shell in my meat at all because I like it sweet tasting. Some people do, some people don't. It's just their preference.
Okay, well let's now talk about the canola and the pounder. So first the canola, how it was to make that, what you understand about making it now.
So Victor always collects his hickory if he's making canola on a full moon. He takes a hickory tree, if it's good, he'll cut it down on a full moon. And the next night or on a full moon, he'll divide it. So from the trunk of the tree, he cuts it up in sections that are appropriate height for all of us. Me and my friend found a piece of the tree that we wanted and we just cut it in half, and he got one side, I got the other. And from that you have to cut off the bark from the trunk, and it's pretty thick bark. I remember going at it for at least 3 days getting the bark off, and I was still nowhere near the actual safe hard spot yet. And then the longest was forming the bowl inside the canola. I've been told like 4 different ways on how to make that bowl, but I told them, I was like, hey, it's mine. So I want it this size. I've been told a large mixing bowl is the depth I want. I've been told a baseball cap is the depth I want. And then I've been told your whole forearm. I'm like, that's too deep for me. And once you get all that, you still have to heat treat it, and you still have to cure it with oil somehow to keep the moisture inside. I remember I would use it making the canola the traditional way, which is a scraper or a hatchet, and I just told Victor, I was like, can I use machinery? It's a little hard, but he told me if it was easy, everybody would do it, and I agreed. If it was easy, everybody in all Cherokee Nation would be doing it, but there was only a couple of us that night. So I did it all by hand until I got to making my bowl. I did that by hand with a chisel, and then I'm like, can I use a saw now or something to make it and smooth it out? And that's when he let me use machinery, which is a sander or a different type of machinery. I can't think of the name at this moment. And just made my bowl, and I used sandpaper to sand it out, make it smooth inside, and treated it one last time and put lard on it to cure it.
Okay, so let's talk about the pounder now.
I think that one was my favorite because it wasn't as tedious as the canola itself. The canola probably took me about a month to make, and the pounder only took me maybe 3 weeks. So it's still hickory. It came off the same tree. It's just a long branch. Victor actually picked out my branch for me. He was like, oh, that one don't look twisted, so we're going to shave it down. So I still used a hand shaver. I scraped off all the bark, still pretty thick, and we looked at it together, and he decided how where my handle should be at and how much weight should be at the end.
Okay.
And he marked it out for me, and he used a chainsaw to indicate where I should be cutting off with a hand saw, whatever. And once I got done sanding it all down, that's whenever he cut off chunks for me for my handle. And that's whenever I had to shape it by hand with the sandpaper and make it all nice and smooth. And once I was done, he was like, well, let's make it a little bit smoother. I was like, well, Victor, it's smooth enough. If he was a man, it'd be smoother. I'm like, but I'm not. I was like, I like the imperfections. And then I cured it with lard as well. So from start to finish, I always cured it with vegetable oil lard to keep the moisture locked inside. And then once I was done, I still put lard on it.
Now, the quinone is sitting right now and further curing.
Yeah.
Talk about that.
So Victor told us whenever he was done, in the summertime, like the heat of the summer, that's when we'll find out if we made it correctly, if we heat treated it correctly, if we cured it properly. If we didn't, it would just crack. Big old cracks or just crack down the middle. If we did it correct, then it should have no cracks in it at all. I only have maybe 2 cracks, and that's on the rim. Like, it don't go into the bowl at all. It doesn't go on the outside, so just small cracks. But with a little elbow grease and lard and heat treating, it'll go away. But right now, my quinone and pounder is sitting in my parents' garage, which is the hottest, like hot part on their property. And I'm going to go see if there's any cracks later.
All right. But you won't actually use it till maybe the fall of 24 or next fall.
Yeah, if my spot has hickory nuts and there's enough to make a ball or two, that's whenever I'll use it. I'll use my quinone and pounder to break open the hickory shell, which is as tough as it is tree bark. Before I made the quinone, I would have to use the old school can crushers and crack it that way, or lose a thumbnail and use a hammer and just hold it there. And my brother got creative, and he was like, no, let's just use 2 rocks. And he did it. I'm like, I'm not that strong. But he thought he was stronger, and he thought he could crack them with one hand. I have yet to have seen it. But now that I have the quinone and pounder, and it's heavy and sturdy, it'll help us crack the hickory nuts faster and more efficiently and make the ball.
All right. I'm going to ask you to talk a little bit about why all this is important.
I feel that it's important because it connects us with our ancestors pre-removal and after removal, because before the removal, if the men didn't get enough game, then that's their protein. The women would go out and forage for hickory nuts, and they come back with their protein. After removal, the women still do that. Even in Oklahoma and North Carolina, they still do that. And it's a delicacy around here. So I feel we need to keep in touch with what was brought back, like the knowledge that was brought with us on the removal. And I liked learning how to make it because I felt more connected with my grandparents that passed away, because Grandma knew how to make it, but she didn't know how to make the ball. So I felt more in touch with her. I felt more in touch with my grandpa because he taught me how to eat it and how to properly prepare it. Other people just might want to learn how to make it just for the fun and say, oh yeah, I know how to make a quinone now. Probably charge you an arm and a leg for it.
Right.
But I just felt connected with family, learning how to make it.
Wonderful. So let's go to full circle, back to the language, and let's talk about why it's so important to learn one's tribal language.
There's a limited time. I feel if we don't learn the language within that allotted time that we have with our speakers before they pass away, then it's all going to fade away. Yes, we have documentation, we have recordings of them talking, but I feel like it's not the same than sitting there and just talking with them in conversation. Because within the recordings you get kind of like a script of what questions you want to be answered, and they'll tell you. But if you're sitting there with them in person, they'll tell you what you want to know, but they'll also give you more. I learned some with Grandpa, but once he passed away, I lost it. But I was fortunate enough to meet people that knew my grandpa and my grandma whenever they were still young, and they tell me stories about them. I think it's cool because I didn't get to meet Grandma. She passed away before I was 2. Grandpa passed away when I was 8, so I felt connected through those stories. Even if it is all in Cherokee, I still felt somewhat connected and happy, and my heart was full. And it's hard learning the language. If it was easy, everybody would do it, but it's really hard. You gotta be determined and want to do it.
Right.
It's not something you can pick up and do within a day or an hour. Like, it's a lifetime commitment. I've learned it since I was 5, and I'm 22 now. I'm still learning.
Right.
It's hard. My dad, he's 46, and he's still trying to learn. We try to teach my mom, and she's like, no, I know my limitation. So just having my dad there and us learning together through old notes that we find in Bibles from Grandpa, or hymns, or just stories, we have a connection that way. Mm-hmm. And I feel like if you'll get adopted into a family learning, whether it's stories or language. You'll learn through that family. If they're not your own blood, that's how Cherokees are. We're related somehow, whether it's clans or actual blood or church families. We're all one no matter what.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let me ask you this to kind of round this out. What is a favorite word or phrase that you have learned lately that you didn't know that provided you some insight into the language and being Cherokee?
I learned one whenever I was going strawberry picking with Cora Flute, and I kept hearing it, and I asked her what it meant. She taught me Udaquis. He or she is trouble.
Oh.
So I would always say that. I was like, oh, Udaquis or Tedaquis, you're just trouble. But growing up, I've always been called Skosti, which in different towns and communities, it means different things. I heard one way it means heroic or something powerful. But in where I'm from, it means you're being mean, you're being rude, ugly. So quit being rude. And I always asked Grandpa, because he called me Skosti. I was like, why you calling me Skosti? I didn't say anything mean. But Skosti and Udaquis, and then Beulah Land, translated to Cherokee. It's always church hymns that's translated to Cherokee, and hearing services in the language makes me proud to feel Cherokee, and just makes me feel more connected with people that I don't know, or with my own family. Because growing up in Cherokee churches, I remember just hearing Grandpa speak in a little English and then resort to Cherokee, and just made me feel at home. But just certain phrases like Udaquis or Dediquis brings me back, like, no, we can have a little fun.
Right. All right. Well, I think is there anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I'm the Ross, that's John Ross's brother.
Okay.
Yeah, he had 7 siblings.
Yeah.
And his oldest brother, Lewis, that's my Ross.
Wow.
That's my kinship.
Cool.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's really deep there.
Yeah. John Ross, his last name means bird or mockingbird. Mine is Aditoti, which is spoon. But at the time that the elders of Salina named him Aditoti, they meant it for helper. Oh. Since we're so helpful, I thought it was fitting.
Right, that is cool.